Hey besties, and welcome back to Platform and to another installment of Penguin Explorer, the video series where I take a little bit of a mini deep dive into some cool literary, academic, and overall just bookish topics. Today's exploration delves into a genre that is perfect for this Halloween season, and it gets us to go delve into those spooky, scary skeletons, and it's definitely one of my favourite genres as well, and it just mesmerises you with its atmosphere and its prose. And so today we're going to be looking at the genre of Gothic fiction. I love reading the Gothic. It's one of my favourite genres and also periods of literature as well, because there's a lot we can dissect not only from the emergence of the Gothic, but what the Gothic symbolises as a whole. Today we'll be looking at a little history behind how the Gothic came to be, what and how we can define the Gothic, and also why are we drawn to the Gothic, and I'll also be giving you some spooky book recommendations as well to get you started with reading this genre if you've never read it before. The 18th century is known as the period that gave rise to the novel as a format of literature, and since then we have seen a multitude of authors make their mark on this newfound way of telling stories. And as the 18th century progressed on and on, nearing the end of the century as a whole, we see this emergence of Gothic literature right after and during a period of Romanticism. Romanticism being a period filled with political unrest and romantic sociability, where people discussed ideas, thoughts, and their opinions about the world around them, and hence led to this shifting socio-political landscape that we were seeing in Great Britain. Romanticism dealt with emotion and the way people felt about their work, but also really delved deep into the politics of the nation as a whole. And so we see this carried through into Gothic literature. As the socio-political landscape became more serious, these associations gave birth to the Gothic, with the title of the very first Gothic novel being heralded towards the Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole, who kind of called it a Gothic as a joke, and then it kind of just stuck, and now we have Gothic literature as we see it today. Which is kind of funny, like starting a joke of something and then it literally becomes this like actual serious thing. Like it's kind of like a meme in that sense. The Gothic slightly contrasted the aesthetic of Romanticism, as where both genres were filled with life and love, the Gothic took a darker turn. It focused on death and the macabre, the supernatural, and the things that we fear. Kind of like when you look at the corner of your eye and you kind of think you can see someone there, that's kind of the feeling that the Gothic tries to bring. It personified the fear that came with the shifting political landscape at the time, often being linked to periods such as the English Civil War, the French Revolution, the Jacobite Revolution of 1745. All of these came together in order to give us a sense of the Gothic that we see today. Researchers have often claimed that classical Gothic villains are actually literary representatives of defeated Tory barons or royalists rising from their political graves to terrorize the bourgeois reader of the late 18th century England. The influences of the Gothic can also be tracked to later periods as well. One such example is the novelist Anne Radcliffe, who wrote The Mysteries of Udolpho. The villain in that novel has a lot of broodiness and characteristics that will later be defined as the Byronic hero. And so we can literally see the Gothic starting to give formations to a lot of literary tropes that are going to be fully fleshed out and formatted into something later down the line. And we can still see a lot of the influences of the Gothic today. One such example actually, which a lot of you may also know, is dark academia. Whilst it also roots itself in kind of like that Eurocentric Greek Romanesque style, the architecture and the mood and like the kind of obsession with life and death really harkens back to the Gothic as a whole. So upon first glance of the Gothic, you may be quick to equate it towards its more typical traits that you associate with. The grand and decaying architecture, manor houses with Victorian architecture, grim and heavy rain, ghosts, darkness, you kind of get the gist. But as we peel away these layers that are on the surface, we actually find that there's a lot more things that the Gothic actually portrays. But as we do look at this surface level, first of all, we typically associate the Gothic with the macabre and the morbid, dealing with those things that make us uncomfortable and unsettled and to make us like kind of squirm in our seats. We can see writers of the Gothic typically often relying on depictions of death, decay, and gruesomeness in order to achieve these effects. This can also kind of almost point towards a romanticization of death, an obsession with death that's almost romantic, which can actually help point to some of its early influences coming from the period of Romanticism, which came before and during the emergence of Gothic literature. However, as well as the aesthetic of the Gothic when medievalist architecture, a bunch of candles, and grim rain, there was an emotional nature to the Gothic as well, concerning death, fear, and sometimes even pleasure and romance. A synergy of the two, the emotional aesthetic, if you will, was defined by Edmund Burke, who talked about the sublime, which is when overwhelming pain and terror can almost turn into some form of a delight, which is something that I kind of see with like horror fans who like enjoy being scared. Burke quotes this though as the strongest emotion which the mind is capable of feeling, that point of absolute terror where you're kind of feeling enjoyed by it. The sublime is often invoked by terror caused by obscurity, as if we know the terror, a great deal of apprehension we feel about the thing we're terrified of vanishes. It is the fact that we have a lack of knowledge about the unknown draws us into the sublime, as we're really scared of things that we don't know about or have a lot of knowledge about. The things that terrify us from around the corner that we literally have no clue what's coming. Our favourite, and I actually kind of mean least favourite, psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud also quotes upon parts of the Gothic as belonging to the uncanny, which he defines as that class of frightening which leads back to what is known of old and long familiar. And so it's kind of the things that take like ghosts. Like we should be pretty scared of ghosts because we don't really know a lot about them, but because of things we've seen in fiction and things that we've seen in like other formats, we kind of feel familiar with what ghosts kind of do and say, which kind of takes away a little bit of the frightening aspect to us, but we're also kind of scared of them because we know of the fact of what they can do. It's strange that we find the familiarity with what we're reading because typically it's often supernatural. A common example is Dracula, where its association with vampires that we all typically know as bloodsuckers is also kind of flipped on its head with the introduction of modern technology at that time, such as typewriters. We think of very much medievalist kind of things when we think of vampires, not really having access to technology, but then this introduction of typewriters kind of gives us something more familiar and grounds it in a sense of realism, which kind of also makes it a lot more scary in that sense, because it makes it feel like something that could be very real in this modern day and time. The Gothic also finally deals with power dynamics, potentially due to the shifting political landscape at the time. However, whilst physical, emotional, or psychological, these acts of violence are also often dramatic, sometimes a key point in the novel, and we can see the Gothic hold on to its medieval roots through this, as the trope of the young woman in danger harkens back to the medievalist damsel in distress. This typical trope within Gothic fiction is often seen as a key way to display the villain, as people who would commit bad acts against these women would be seen as immoral and bad and a criminal. However, a lot of these power dynamics also shift into sexual difference, which is another key point of Gothic literature, which is also one of my favourites, purely from like a sexuality analysis kind of state, as we can see with Dracula and the picture of Dorian Gray, that kind of homoeroticism that occurs during both of these novels. It's very interesting to analyse and look at, as the Gothic allowed a freedom that other genres of fiction do not, as it delves into that uncanny, something that seems unfamiliar at the premise, but as you delve into it a bit more, it kind of seems familiar to certain readers. It kind of gives that vibe of the Gothic through exploring sexual desire, which is very interesting and I love it so much. But speaking of why we love the Gothic, why are we drawn to it a lot of the time? Since this initial period of the emergence of the Gothic, there have been such an expansion in the Gothic genre, as we see with contemporary and Southern Gothic developing as subgenres of the Gothic as a whole. We also have modern Gothic writers such as Anne Rice with Interview with the Vampire, Silvia Moreno Garcia with Mexican Gothic, Stephen King, and also Neil Gaiman. We have a emergence of a lot of different Gothic writers coming out of the framework. There's a Gothic fiction bot on Twitter which I follow that some of my friends run, and they tweet out some Gothic fiction quotes every now and again, and I just am utterly obsessed with it because it kind of reminds us of why we love the Gothic so much, that kind of atmosphere and the uncanny and the things that just make us uncomfortable and we fear, personified and characterized in different ways. It fills me with such joy, but also like it's kind of like the healthy obsession with fear and that healthy relationship with fear. Like I like a little bit of fear, but not too much, you know? And because of this, we see the characteristics of the Gothic being carried through to the modern period today, and seeing these traditions also updated, becoming more intersectional because of certain writers. And it's very, very welcoming and amazing to see, because literature as a whole can be updated and changed and shifted and evolved, as we see as Romanticism became the Gothic, and Romanticism also continued throughout this period, but also how we just have different modes and shifts of literature because of the periods we're in. I just find the atmospheric nature of the Gothic so intriguing, and particularly, like I mentioned earlier, what might have aided in the creation of dark academia as both an aesthetic and a genre of literature. Also, what's awesome for me is that I'm currently doing a module at the moment talking about the Gothic and Romanticism in my Narrative and Nation module, and it's just cool that I'm getting to do this video today because I kind of get to do some of the research for those seminars early. And so before we end today's Penguin Explorer, I want to give a few bookish recommendations for you in order to either start your Gothic journey or also carry on with a few other recommendations, and some of them I've actually already mentioned in this video. And so we have The Castle of Otranto, the very first Gothic novel. We have Dracula for its vampiric nature, Frankenstein for its themes of hubris and the other. We have Mexican Gothic, a modern Gothic novel, which is particularly one of my favorites, and also The Haunting of Hill House. I'm sure some of you might have already seen the Netflix series, but I would also highly recommend reading the book behind the show as well, and just seeing how Shirley Jackson kind of takes the Gothic genre for herself. And of course, if you have any other Gothic recommendations, be sure to leave them in the comment section down below, because we want to give some book recommendations, start a conversation going about the Gothic genre as a whole, and so that we can explore the Gothic genre together. And so wraps the 4th installment of Penguin Explorer. I hope you found this installment to be quite enlightening and also giving you that kind of spookiness that you need for this Halloween season. I hope you're celebrating Halloween very well and that you're getting into the mood for it, because Christmas is next, and I feel like I need to watch The Nightmare Before Christmas now, just so that I can get that kind of sweet spot between the two occasions, you know? And if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you're new here, be sure to check out all the other platform videos that Penguin create. They're just so amazing, and I hope you enjoy your stay here. If you want to check me out on any other of my platforms, I'll have my links in the description down below for you, but you can also check me out on Fictional Fates at YouTube. And so yeah, I guess until the next time, see you later, platform.